Welcome to the Unstoppable Recording Machine Podcast, brought to you by Mick DSP, professional audio plugins. For over 15 years, Mick DSP has continued producing industry-acclaimed and award-winning software titles. The podcast is also brought to you by Slate Digital, all the pro plugins, one low monthly price. And now your hosts, Joey Sturgis, Joel Wanasek, and EYAL Levy.
Hey guys, welcome to the Joey Sturgis Forum Podcast. I'm Joey Sturgis, and with me, as always, is Joel Wanasek and EYAL Levy, and today we have a special guest, Jamie King, the man.
The legend.
Jamie King is the man, the legend.
The redneck.
Thanks for being with us, man. I've been following your work for well over 10 years at this point, I think. For real, I think that I heard that early Between the Buried and Me stuff, maybe 2005 or something.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so I'm stoked to have you on here. I've been a fan for ages. And I just want to say that I love the most recent Between the Buried and Me, the way it sounds so natural and big and just sounds like a real band, yet modern.
Yeah, it has a lot to do with Jens Bogren also, so he's actually the guy who mixed it. So
yeah, but you had to record it. He's a great mixer, too. We're actually having him coming on.
Awesome.
A little bit.
We'll definitely have to check that out. Well, I'm definitely honored for you guys to have me on. I mean, it's like I said, I look up to and respect and reference all your works oftentimes to try to get tones for stuff that I do. So
that's awesome. And I just want to say that, congrats on snagging one of the coolest bands to record, I think.
Oh, yeah, I got lucky on that one.
That brings up a question that a lot of our listeners bring up. I'm going to just phrase it my own way. I've noticed that a lot of producers who work with bigger bands tend to have found that one band that got big and that helped spawn their career. Not that they wouldn't have had a recording career anyways, but usually there tends to be that one band. How did you end up meeting them? Like, how did you cultivate that relationship? What kept it going? How did you keep them coming back to you?
I was doing live sound, I guess, in the late 90s or whatever, early 2000s, and I did sound for Prayer for Cleansing, which was Tommy and Paul's band before Between the Buried and Me, and they had heard my old band, Swift, my recordings of that band, which is the band I did my first multi-track recordings. And at the time, it was like the first local stuff that was even kind of listenable. Like the audio engineers around this area were just terrible, or just just not affordable at all. So I think that was the key thing. I mean, it was just, I think the main aspect is I was, young and into the style of music they were doing, and I understood the tones that they were going for. Back in the day, a lot of the local engineers, they were just older guys who could afford the expensive equipment back in the day, and they just didn't understand metal or younger generations of music.
We had Kurt Ballou on here a couple months ago, and he basically said the same exact thing that you just said, that the way that he got his career going was by filling that niche, because the guys with nice studios in his area didn't understand the style at all. So either your options were go to a horrible, horrible place or go to one of these super nice places, and both were going to get you a bad result. So he just figured he was going to fill that niche.
Well, I'll echo that too, because that's how I got started. There was if you wanted to pay like $70 an hour, you would get what would be the worst local band recording you've ever heard in the town that I'm from.
Exactly.
And I was the only guy that could do metal. So if I was charging like $25-$30 an hour at the time, you kept me booked because no one could really do that kind of music. And if they could, they were so outrageously priced that it just wasn't affordable for any bands.
Yeah, that's exactly. I mean, that's why Between the Buried and Me chose to record with me. I think I was working out of my parents' basement doing live recordings with an ADAT. Some of the cheapest stuff that you could get at the time. Is all I could afford, and but I could keep my rates were I think I started at $10 an hour, and then maybe we were like $15 an hour. And it was all live recording, so there was no production going into it. It was just like bands would come in, record for 2 or 3 days, and the whole total bill was like $300 to $500. So obviously obvious demo quality type stuff, but at the time kind of more raw type productions were kind of in vogue with the new metal movements and the dirty metal stuff that was going on. That was kind of the sound at the time. So I kind of had to step up my game as the demand for more produced products came into vogue or whatever.
That brings up the question then, if that's how you were starting and that's how you met them, by being the guy in town that could fulfill their needs, I guess, how did you manage to keep that relationship going, though? Because, I mean, we all know that lots of times a band will work with one guy that's affordable and local, but then once the record label gets into the picture, they get moved over to the producer of choice from the label. But you managed to keep the relationship going.
Yeah, I think there's a number of factors. I think, with Between the Buried and Me, obviously, we're on the same page musically. We have a lot of the same background in terms of like what we listen to coming up. And Between the Buried and Me are really into, surrounding themselves with positive people, people who they enjoy spending time with. It's about the life experience, large in part for them. And, there's the element that I'm close by. Blake, the drummer, lives up the road. Dusty doesn't live too far. Tommy and Paul used to only live like an hour and a half from here. So there's that element. The first record with Victory Records or whatever, they did go up to Boston to record.
So it did happen.
I did the first live style record, that record came out originally with Lifeforce Records in Germany, and Victory bought that contract out. Obviously, they wanted someone who could do more of a produced product, so they sent them to Boston to record, and BT Bam basically cited that as a nightmare experience for them because the guy they were working with, even though he's a super talented engineer, he just didn't understand the music, and we tried to talk them into like keeping bad takes and didn't understand the tones, and basically wouldn't do anything they asked him to do. He just did his own thing, and they just didn't like that. They knew I was, I'm the type of guy who will try to do it what they want to do.
I think that's a great point, Jamie, because I've got a very strong opinion on this because I used to develop a lot of bands, and then, earlier in my career, a lot of them would get picked and they would go work with some expensive guy, and they would always come back to me for their next record and be like, yeah, we hated it. When you develop a friendship and a bond and like a certain level of trust, as well as like a creative balance with that band, where like you can complete each other's musical sentences. You know what I mean? Like you just have a chemistry with them.
Exactly.
That's built over a lot of work together. You just know each other as people. You know what to predict. You know what to expect. And that's not something that you can usually get with a band when you're doing one record with them for the first time. So if you've done a bunch of recordings over a period of years with a band, then all of a sudden they get signed, then they go to some new producer, they're going to be totally out of their element and comfort zone, and they may not get the best result. So I think it's always cool when a band takes a producer with them, if they go up the ladder to like a major label or, a large indie or something like that, and they fight for the team that helped get them there, because those are the people that, they created some sort of magic that gathered the investors in the first place in the project. And that's just one of those things that drives me nuts, because you can't replace that magic chemistry that exists with a band. It just is not something that happens right away on day one. It takes time.
Yeah, another thing that happens to me is I'll work with a band, the album comes out and the fans sort of have whatever their expectation is, and some people will say, Joey ruined this, or he changed the band. It's like, no, the band actually came to me and was like, hey, can we be more like this other band that you did? And I'm like, well, if that's what you need and that's what you want, I guess you're paying me, so I have to kind of do it.
Yeah, with me, the client's the boss, and the reason, I take that approach is, I get into recording for my own band, because like we were just talking about just a few seconds ago, that I got into recording just because there was no one in the area that was willing or able to give me the tones and things that I wanted. So, even though, there were studios I was going to paying $90 an hour, and these guys just would not, give me the punchy kick drum I wanted, or, the metal guitars that I wanted at the time, because alternative was huge, or rap rock or whatever. That was key for Between the Buried and Me, and they had a specific, very, specific vision, and they're really big on sounding the way they sound, and I think that's why they come to me, because they keep going to people, and those people tend to like try to steer them in other directions and change their material, and for a lot of bands, I think that's that's needed and a positive thing. They need that direction, or they need input, and they actually want it. But for BT BAM, basically they just want a facilitator, someone to maybe add to what they're doing, but not necessarily change it. So, and I think they know I'm that dude, and we hang out and have fun together, and I'm local, and like I said, in a lot of ways, I just feel like I got lucky that they actually like me.
I've noticed that there's some modern metal producers that are really, really good, but they kind of do the same thing every time, no matter what the record is. So if the band is terrible, they do the same thing, and if the band is great, they do the same thing, which I think is a mistake. I mean, clearly, if the band is terrible and they're going to that producer, the producer is doing the right thing by putting them through the surgical reconstruction process. But if you have a band of great musicians with a very defined musical vision and personality and character, may as well do what you can to bring out what they want. They don't need you to fix them. They just need you to, like you said, facilitate them. So here's a question. You said that you started with live recording and things started to pick up a little and you realized that you needed to up your game some, but there weren't many resources back then like there are now, I think. Like, how did you go about getting better?
Yeah, it was tough at that time. There wasn't YouTube and other resources of that nature. There were no local engineers I could shadow or anything. Most of what I've learned and most of the I guess if you call them skills or whatever I've developed are just from trial and error. Just like reading.
Amen, brother.
I just had no choice, unfortunately. I don't recommend it because it takes forever. It's taken me 10 years to get where I am now, and I'm still not where I want to be. But
if I can jump in, there's one major thing about being self-taught that I think is really cool is you develop a very unique sound that way much quicker than you would if you were to shadow somebody and kind of quasi-steal all their tricks,
Also a unique understanding, like it's like your labor, you connect with it on a super deep level because someone didn't tell you how to do it. You didn't read a book that told you how to do it. You literally figured it out on your own. And I think that's super strong.
Yeah, I gotta say though, I feel like even if you do have the good fortune of coming up under somebody or having those positive influences in your production growth, you still got to put in the work either way.
Yeah.
I mean, just because someone says cut some nasty frequencies on guitars doesn't mean that you're going to automatically know when there's too many of them or too little of them on a guitar tone. Like, these are things that you need to figure out for yourself anyways. But it does help, I think, to have someone tell you that this is something you need to be listening for. If Creative Live or YouTube existed 10 years ago, I would have been so happy.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh my God. Right?
Yeah, I mean, it's having gone through it, having been doing this for a living for 15 years. Like, there's a lot of bad habits and things that I developed using the wrong gear for the wrong sounds and things of that nature. That if I knew then what I knew now, I think I would be further along now. So, anybody listening out there, I recommend them check out, the Creative Live stuff, or, try to shadow someone or get in for an education session with the people who are in the know and at least get, the solid foundation, for the production style and the sounds that you're going for, and then try to develop your own sound from there. I think you do develop your own kind of sound through self-teaching and learning, but you can also develop a lot of time-consuming, bad habits and things like that. I really personally I'm still unlearning because I started with mixing board and a rack of gear and a couple of ADATs, and there was a kind of a different approach, and I had to change things. I started in with Pro Tools early, but it's more of an integration type of approach of just editing and still mixing on the board and things of that nature. And there's so many more options in the digital realm now. And
if you don't mind sharing, what are some of the things that I guess you've had to unlearn, but at the same time, what are some of the things that you've done wrong, technically wrong, but that actually are pretty cool? Like, I'm sure there's some happy accidents.
I record all my sessions in one session. Pro Tools, I've learned how to streamline things so that works for most of the stuff that I do. I feel like that's maximum efficient.
I want to say, man, that's really cool to do. Wanted to do it. I think I tried it a couple times to do a whole session in one project. I never figured out how to actually get it manageable, at least in Cubase.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, at least for Pro Tools, what are some of the things you're doing to make it?
A lot of what I do, it's got a lot to do with just sharing a bunch of tracks and things, just grouping things and, like keys and things like that. Most of the people who do a lot of MIDI stuff, soundscape production, things like that, a lot of those people will do it outside the session. And that's kind of what I do. I just, I think I saw in Joey's Creative Live class where he does things in separate sessions and imports in and things of that nature. And that can help, keep the Pro Tools session from being crazy, as far as Pro Tools is definitely, I don't think it's the best thing for the MIDI stuff. Usually I do most of that stuff in a different session and then import any keys and MIDI stuff, or so I'm not running a bunch of MIDI stuff or instruments and things like that. It'll take up a lot of CPU, but
I see. So it's kind of like you have a additional layer by having this master Pro Tools session that everything ends up being piled into, not necessarily the session that you work in and record on and edit in, but it's where you kind of toss in all the little pieces at the end.
Basically it's like I have a session, it's just all the waves, and then any MIDI information is generally speaking bounced, worked in another session and bounced in. I don't do a lot of bands that have a lot of that stuff, and when I do, oftentimes they have they just bounce out the stems themselves of the keys or the individual key tracks themselves, and I'll just import it and process the actual wave and stuff. So I think that helps. And I just started that by accident because with ADAT you just record till the tape is run out. I didn't realize that most people track separate songs on separate sessions. I just started it from with Pro Tools. I just going into,
hey guys, well, half this song ended up getting cut off on this tape, so let's go grab another tape and finish the other half.
Yeah, I have been there.
I used to do it all in one session too, and then I went and I did a record with Joey where I had produced and engineered and he had mixed, and I walked in with my session and he's like, "What the hell is this? Why didn't you drop these all into single sessions?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, that's kind of a cool way to do it. I never thought about that." So he converted me over 2008.
Yeah.
I've been doing it that way ever since.
I've learned I don't think there's any rules. I think just whatever works for you. You know what I'm saying? And for a lot of the bands I'm recording lately, I get a lot of clients that are, big fans of Between the Bury and Me, of course. And, a lot of these people are trying to do concept records or records that flow song to song. And it really helps to have everything in one session just because the client knows exactly how the songs are going to flow and you can work with everything in context, and there's no guesswork. And plus just little things like, I never have to close and open up the session. I can open up one session and leave it open all day and we can just keep recording. I can bounce from song to song and there's no closing and opening and things like that, copying over settings or any of that kind of stuff. It helps things be a little more consistent, easier, I guess.
I was going to say, I think it's really awesome from mixing and tracking. Where I always hated everything in one session is when you're editing drums and you've got 4,000 little cuts.
Yeah.
In Cubase, we do this thing called slip editing, which is, there is Beat Detective now, but it didn't happen until Cubase 6 or something like that.
Yeah.
So everybody in Cubase would just cut and then slide the audio within the block. And, you have 50,000 cuts on a screen and then you bounce everything down and it gets kind of slow on the CPU and can lag a lot. Or if you're doing a lot of MIDI production and stuff like that, like you guys are talking about, that can really bog you down and be a pain in the butt when you've got 400 open VST instruments and you're still tweaking sounds.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, there's pros and cons to both.
Hey guys, EYAL here, and I just want to take a moment to talk to you about this month on Nail the Mix. If you're already a subscriber, thank you so much. We appreciate the hell out of you. But if you're not, and you want to seriously up your mixing game, then you might want to consider Nail the Mix this month. We have a guest mixer, Mr. Kane Churko, and he will be mixing Face Everything and Rise by Papa Roach. And when you subscribe, you get the multi-tracks that he recorded and produced. You download them. You can enter a mix competition with prizes by McDSP. You get an Emerald Pack version 6. That's like a $1,600 software package. Plus, the winner also gets 1 year of the Everything bundle from Slate. So really, really good prize package for our mix competition winners. We've also got a second place package that rules. And if you join Nail the Mix, you also get bonus access to our exclusive community, which is other audio professionals and aspiring professionals just like you who just dork out on this stuff all day and night and love spreading knowledge. It's troll free, and so whether you're noob or experienced, it's a great place to just come talk about the thing we all share, which is a love for audio. So once again, if you haven't subscribed to Nail the Mix yet, this might be a great month to try. You get to learn how Kane Churko mixed the #1 single Face Everything and Rise by Papa Roach. Just go to nailthemix.com/Papa Roach. That's nailthemix.com/Papa Roach.
To both ways, it's just whatever works for you. I think I've just developed some workarounds to deal with the CPU thing, like with, doing drum quantizing. I'll just do a couple minutes at a time and consolidate the files and, get rid of the unused files as I go. And that just keeps the machine from being bogged down. And I don't think any of that affects the sound at all. It's just workflow stuff that I personally, I'm kind of glad I do it. I feel like it works well for me, and just little things like that. But as far as things for sound, as far as mistakes and stuff, like I mess with the wrong mics on guitar tones and on guitar amps and on drums and things, and wrong miking techniques and stuff like that. And it's just really cost me a bunch of time trying to figure out how things work. And plus, I'm from the analog days of running to a mixing board and ADAT. So I used to like EQ things going into the recorder, with analog, boosting and cutting, can yield some positive benefit to the tone. But in the digital realm, I feel like a bunch of boosting, EQ and stuff, actually just makes things harsh. And I had to learn to cut more so in the digital realm as opposed to the old school boost in the analog realm. So
yeah, I'm with you there.
It's weird how I really feel like they're different, beasts. Even the emulators, they feel different and act different with the actual signal than the digital.
I think it says a lot, though, that you've taken the effort and time to learn how to adapt to the new system. Because, man, a lot of guys who started analog, they don't adapt to the digital realm. And it's possible to get great results in the digital realm. You just have to treat it like a different beast, like you said. But hey, that's why you're recording cool stuff and still a relevant guy out there, because you've adapted to the modern age. So here is something that I'm wondering, back on the one session for everything. I know a few guys who like to do a single session. I've gone back and forth, and I'm a Pro Tools guy, so this is why I'm wondering. The times where I like to mix in a single session tend to be when it's a more homogeneous sound on the record. Like if I'm doing a death metal band and there's not much variation between the songs, like they don't all have a completely unique arrangement, then it makes a lot of sense to me, because you can keep it super consistent, and once you get a song mixed well, you're good to go.
Yeah.
But when you start to get records where every song has drastically different arrangements, I find that it's a lot harder to work in one session. But I know that a lot of the bands you work with do have drastically different arrangements in every song. So do you have any other suggestions for keeping the Pro Tools session from getting too crazy, besides just print the synths in another session and just bring in the waves? Like, do you have any other workarounds, or is it just trying to get things as consistent as possible, like cleans on a clean track?
Yeah, I think that's, every once in a while, if it's, if there's something with just total different instrumentation and things of that nature, I'll make another session and then work out of there and then bounce and import and things of that nature, particularly with interludes, intros, outros, that type of thing. But yeah, I mean, usually it's just, things, if one song has a tambourine, I don't create a tambourine track. I just make a percussion track, stuff that's, processed commonly. Like you might bus it and run, a common bus compressor, verb or, environment simulation or something of that nature. Like, I might route those, like my keyboard tracks, I usually label just key 1, key 2. I don't go through and label like string, what it is, I might label the actual waveform what it is, but I don't actually create whole new tracks. I think that just keeps everything to a minimum as far as the CPU usage and things of that nature. I'm really simple. I mean, I don't do a lot of processing. Usually I try to keep the sound as pretty stripped down in terms of like how much, how many plugins even I'm using. I'm just not a big fan of running 10 things on a snare drum or whatever to get the snare. I usually want it to sound like a snare drum, just maybe EQ'd and compressed a little bit for consistency. So that in and of itself, that I guess that fundamental choice to keep the processing to a minimum, I think, is also enables me to use less CPU. So I guess it just depends on how much you're doing in terms of like in the specific plugins. We all know like guitar harmonic distortion based plugins or whatever, for some reason just use insane amounts of CPU, so maybe bouncing those things out, can help, like sometimes, like using a Sans amp on bass or amp farm or something like that, bounce out that stuff so you don't have to actually run it in the session,
But aside from CPU, what do you think about bouncing it out just for the sake of commitment? Because I've learned that by bouncing the sound down and pretty much getting rid of the source, it's enabled me to get things done, whereas before I would have analysis paralysis and have way too many options and just never decide.
Oh yeah. Like I said, I have OCD to a degree or whatever, and that's one thing I've had to learn to try to like let go more so over the years. Like I'm always thinking things could be better and better, and and the truth of the matter is oftentimes it's true, it can be better, but like you said, you can't get things done. So I think I just, as opposed to bouncing stuff out or committing, for that reason or whatever, I just, in my brain, I just like, okay, it's good. We'll come back to it. I'll see if it's important later once we get everything done. And, but I could definitely see that because like, I'm OCD and it's tough to like let go and things of that nature. But I do try to tend to leave things as flexible as possible and not committed as possible. Like I always keep the direct signals for guitars for reamping. There's always the option for resampling drums or changing EQs. Always keep any MIDI information so in case we need to change the MIDI sound, and just because I know how clients are, and I'm really big on,
I'll tell you, when I talk about this commitment thing, it's true, like it's what I do, but at the same time, I just do a save as. So I'll do, like right before I'm about to commit, I'll do save as, give it some kind of name where I'm like, piano source or string section source, and then save as again, the next version of the song, bounce it down, get rid of all that stuff. And then if I need to go back, I can open up that save as session and make a change and stuff. But I try and avoid that like the plague.
Me also, it's just, you know how clients are. I mean, when they come into the record, they're like, hey, we want to sound like this. And then by the end of the record, they've changed their mind because a new record's come out that they want to copy and emulate. And I'm like, dude, that sounds nothing like what we tuned the drums for, So, there's an element that you have to kind of deal with there. So,
yep.
I'm with you. Like I said, I try to get a really good idea what the client wants to go for and try to commit to those sounds and try to get them to commit to the sounds. And to anybody listening out there, just always save everything. I back up everything in triplicate, because I've heard horror stories of people losing stuff or, not being able to change tones and things like that. I think you guys have a level of expertise with like guitar tones and stuff that I just don't have, because a lot of times, I'll get a tone I think is rocking by itself, in the mix or whatever. And then I, start mixing. I realize the tone's just got too much gain or not enough. And, I generally work with real amps and things of that nature. So I often have to reamp and things of that.
I'll tell you a secret. None of us actually knows what we're doing.
Sure, it absolutely sounds like you're geniuses.
We all think exactly like you do. I mean, I've never cut a guitar tone in my life where I've been like, this is awesome when I get into the mix. I'm always like, damn it, I screwed this up and I need to fix it.
Yeah, you're not there for the 2 weeks that I want to blow my brains out or like reamp things for the 25th time.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll just pretend we never had that conversation. Yes, everything we do is perfect.
Yeah.
That's the beautiful thing about all this is that you work so hard on a 3-minute song. No one hears the 30 days it took to get there.
Oh, I know.
It seems like a magic trick, Whoa, this song's awesome. How'd you do all this? Well, it took me 30 days.
And I made everyone hate me in the process. And my dog won't even talk to me.
But it still sounds terrible to me. So
yeah, I feel like every guy I know that mixes and produces goes through that mental game. And at some point, they either like what they've got or they have to move on because someone's going to kill them.
I've come to the realization, that, it's got to be to a certain point or whatever. But, there's some of the best records on, or the best selling records, most successful, some timeless classic records. I mean, there's flaws on them. There's no, they're not perfect from the engineering standpoint. Things like, not saying that gives you an excuse to not try to your best to get a killer record or whatever, but, holding up a record for a year just because of some tones or takes or something like that is kind of ridiculous when you really look at it in reality. It's just a lot of things that we hear is not something that the average listener is even going to ever hear or care about. So try to learn to be reasonable about and try to get the clients to be reasonable. Some clients don't care enough about what it sounds like. And some clients, they just get too nitpicky about stuff. I'm like, dude, that doesn't matter, to anyone, and it shouldn't even matter to you. I don't even know why it matters to you.
Yeah, if the snare drum has 0.5 dB of a boost at 8K more, your mom, when she listens to the song, isn't going to like it any more or less. Either it's a good song or it's not.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's a tough thing. There's a lot of psychology that goes in with dealing with clients and it's just dealing with yourself. I think, as an engineer or as a mix guy or, producer or whatever, is just trying to, balance that. Would it make sense to really focus on the content, the material at the end of the day? Is the song good? Is the take solid? Is the tone solid? Is it perfect? In my answer, in my situation, is usually never. It's almost never perfect. We got lucky every once in a while and get a killer tone on something, or a killer take here and there, or whatever. That's just like perfect for the part or whatever. But most of the time, it's just like always feel like it could be better. But if I don't know, I have a tough time taking the whole Mutt Lange approach. Most of my clients don't have that budget to even come close to that anyway.
Mutt Lange takes it to a ridiculous level.
Yeah, I mean, but that might be what translates into the money. I don't know, but
I think a good lesson for anybody is go dig up, and this exists on the internet with a little bit of Google searching, but you can find stems and things like that from old records. I'll give you an example. I remember one time I was at a bar and I was drunk and I was by one speaker, and there was like one of the Appetite for Destruction songs on from Guns N' Roses. I don't remember which one, but it was one of their biggest songs. I was sitting there and I was like, man, the guitar playing on this side sucks. Like, I can't believe there's all these mistakes. And I'm sitting there analyzing it. And I mean, I'm totally wasted, but I just couldn't believe how bad the guitar playing was. And I never noticed it. And I'm a guitar player. I've listened to those songs 1,000 times and I love them. And I've never even paid attention to it. So if you want to blow your mind, just dig into some old stems and listen to how amazingly interesting some of the performances are on some of the best songs that have ever been written.
Oh yeah, Sweet Child of Mine. Adler goes to the ride on the first hit by accident. As a drummer, I noticed that. Blake actually pointed it out to me from between the Bury Me. It's supposed to be on a hi-hat, and he hits the crash and goes to the ride once and switches back over. I'm sure you guys have heard of it. Drummers do that. And it's in the song. It's like, what? Like, who missed that? Like, that's insanity, But at the end of the day, does it matter? No, It drives me insane, my OCD. I'm like, I would have been like, dude, you got to retract that. But apparently they just didn't even care or notice. They were probably all high. So.
I'm sure that there was
alcohol,
some of that involved. So I guess that makes me wonder, what level of edits do you impose on the drums, and how much of it do you try to get through the natural performance? And I guess, how do you deal with drummers that aren't up to snuff?
Yeah, it completely depended on the drummer and the production style that the band wants. Like usually when I'm working with a band, I tell people I usually don't like to try to copy any styles or any particular record or whatever, but let me hear some records that you kind of dig the drum sounds on or the overall production, and that'll dictate which way we go about things. If somebody brings in a more produced product that's sample blended or sample replaced or whatever, then I know automatically, hey, a lot of the more modern produced stuff, it's definitely quantized, or the drums are straight up programmed. We're definitely going to quantize. So I don't even, while we're tracking, I'm not even concerned about, subdivisions and, how tight he is to the click or any of that stuff. I'm mainly just listening to the cymbals and making sure they're clean and dynamic. But, if a band comes in and they're like, hey, we want to be like natural, if they bring in somebody like, a Mastodon record or whatever, or, a Kurt record, it's obviously real, just natural, primarily natural drums, then it's going to be more important during tracking for me to make sure they're, close to the click and dynamics are solid and sound and stuff like that. We're going to spend more time tracking. So, further than that, it just depends on the drummer. Some drummers come in, they're like, hey, we want to sound like a Mastodon or something like that, but they're not subdivision solid enough or dynamic enough then basically I'll have to take the route of doing more quantizing and sample blending, but I'll try to keep that more natural, like just, use the actual kit, the samples from the actual kit and things of that nature, and try to just really make it sound as organic as possible. And so it just is really across the board. It just depends on what the client wants, honestly. Like with Blake from Between the Bear and Me, he's a monster. We use his real performance takes because he plays dynamically. His subdivisions are solid. Quantizing is really, it's there or whatever, for, syncing reasons and things like that with, keys and, program material. But it's, it's more loose than I would do, say, with some more modern, slick, metal type production I attempt or whatever, where I would just go hard on the quantizing.
Yeah, with drummers like Blake, I tend to, I've never recorded Blake, but, when recording badass drummers like that, I try to just get the performance out of them and then manually edit anything that needs it. And I try to avoid beat detective in those scenarios as much as possible. Maybe if there's a pattern kick part that needs to be perfect stylistically, then I'll do that, because let's face it, nobody can actually play it to the level of perfection that some of those parts need to be at. So on those parts, I'll do it a little bit, but I still, I know what you mean. I'm pretty easy-handed about it with a great drummer.
Yeah, it's one of those things. It's like, for me personally, like, I like a record to sound like the band on their very best day, like an idealized version of what the band sounds like, meaning that everything's on time and in tune. Everybody happened to play on stage and just nail everything to the best of their human ability.
I feel like that's a good quote to frame on a wall and put up or something like that. I think that's a really golden nugget. I love it. I think that's a great piece of advice.
Yeah, but there's a lot of bands who, they'll bring in, references, and they want to sound better than is humanly possible. And I don't think there's anything bad. There's Fear Factory. They sound like a factory, so they use triggers, and everything is quantized or whatever. And it's just like, there's bands out there who should sound mechanical or Meshuggah. I mean, they're unbelievable, but you can't have a loose Meshuggah. That wouldn't even, to me, that style of music calls for a level of precision to get the idea across that, is probably difficult to achieve in a live recording type of situation. So, I mean, it just depends on what the client wants and needs to translate what they're doing properly. And it's just, it's an opinion at the end of the day.
But in the Fear Factory or Meshuggah context, that's an artistic choice. That's deliberate.
Yeah.
That's not because
they can't do it. They obviously can do it. Yeah. That's my thing. It's just like, I've had drummers, just like you said, if the drummer can do it, and sometimes I've had drummers who are fantastic and they want to really produce, and they're bringing me references of like, dude, that's quantized, that's programmed drums and things of that nature. I'm like, I try to talk them like, dude, your drumming's awesome. It can sound great, natural. Let's try to capture the real performance, because to me, rock and metal has traditionally been a performance-based art, and there's a certain energy and emotional connection or something that happens when you're actually capturing and using as much of the performance as possible, But having said that, there's some bands that sound best, or some styles of music that sounds best with it more perfected, Periphery, that stuff needs to be super perfect, and that's what makes the most impact for that style. So it's just a production call that it's a decision that you make or whatever as you're going along, based for me, it's a decision I make based on what they want and what I think is best for their product and record.
So how do you deal with it when you know that they're not capable physically of doing what you want or what they want, but they're hard-headed about how to get there, meaning they want something that's inhuman, but they want to keep it natural, but they're not good enough to keep it natural? How do you approach that without causing World War III?
Well, I mean, again, it comes back to, the way I look at it, whoever's paying for the record is the boss. If the label is paying for the record and they expect me to deliver a product, I feel like I have a little more leverage with the band. I usually try to side with the band on something, but if they're like, hey, I want 30-second no kick drums here, I'm like, dude, I know you can't do that. I try to talk them out of it. I mean, I really do. I mean, like, I don't like doing the whole Dragon Force guitar stuff where you slow the guitars down and speed them up. I'm like, dude, it's not going to sound anywhere close to that when you play it live.
I hate that so much.
Punching in is one thing, but it's just like there's awesome things you can do with a computer, to make something sound cool or whatever. And it's always been done. I mean, it even it's done with Cowboys from Hell from Pantera, where they actually recorded a quarter step down and tuned it back up to standard, close to standard, production reasons, it sharpens transients and things like that. So there's reasons to do stuff or whatever, but I don't want to, I don't mind using the technology to save time and, to idealize things to a bit like tuning vocals and things of that nature. But I don't want to tune a person's vocals to a note that they can't possibly ever hit, or speed up guitars or kick drums to levels that I just know that this player cannot do. And I generally try to talk them out of it, and use reason, like, dude, you're going to have to do this on a night-to-night basis if you become successful, possibly. I rarely recommend against that. But at the end of the day, if they're paying, I mean, I have to do what they say. If the label's paying, then I'm going to be like, dude, no.
Hey, I'm curious, how do you guys, like Joey, how do you deal with artistic disputes between the label and the band?
It's a tough one, man. I usually just try, and if I'm like sided with the label, then it's pretty easy, But if I'm sided with the band, I will just ignore the label and just, it's not like they're going to fly over here and force me to make the song the way they want it. At the end of the day,
I think that requires a certain amount of clout too to be able to get away with.
Exactly. Like, I couldn't have done that on day one. No way. But if I don't bounce the song out the way that they want me to bounce it out, then who else is going to do it, The other thing is I always have a contract that protects me in that way. There's something called a master, and what that really is it's referring to the song. I have creative freedom over my masters, so if the label really, really wanted to push something super far to the point where we're just not going to use this, we want to have this section of the song longer, and I'm like refusing to do it, they still got to pay me for that song, and then they also have to pay someone else to go remake the song from scratch, which we all know is not really going to happen because, let's face it, who wants to go do a whole nother recording session just to make a section of a song longer? So a lot of times I'll win if I really, really feel like it's worth fighting for. However, I do pick and choose my battles, and I know there's some times where it's just pointless to even, argue over something like that. But between the label and the band is definitely a tough one, and I try to just be on the band side because, bands hop around from producer to producer and bands hop around from label to label. You're not really doing a lot by having some kind of alliance with the label. It's better to be friends with the bands, I think.
To me, it's the band's art.
Exactly.
If the label has legitimate claim to, about something, to be honest, like, I've never had a label that cares that much, like, of course I deal with smaller labels than you guys do, generally speaking, whatever, but most of the labels are like, cool, 10 tracks, enough minutes of audio, sounds good,
I think the bigger the label, the less, it just depends, it's a different styles of music. Like, I working with Rise, I'll say Rise is amazing when it comes to creative freedom because they sign bands on the basis of like, okay, this is what this band is. We're not going to change it. We're not going to say anything about what they do creatively. And that's kind of how it goes down. I mean, you make the record, it sounds dope, and then you turn it in and they're like, thank you. And that's it. But then there's other labels that like to micromanage everything. And
oh God, I hate that. The rock, the radio stuff, especially in rock and pop, is like that. They're very much popular this week on radio. Oh, we need to do that. So whatever you guys have been working on the last 3 months isn't good enough. Write 10 more songs.
I've dealt with both extremes in big labels and small labels. I think it comes down to the individual personality of the A&R guy and whoever he works with directly over at the label.
I will say this, the most supportive label I've ever worked with, I think one of them on like the large scale side was when I did the Fueled by Ramen Atlantic Vinyl Theater. And their A&R guy, Steve Robertson, was awesome because, he weighed in, he had an opinion, and they had some like specific arrangement requests, but they let us do pretty much whatever we wanted to do. And it was awesome because the band was very adamant about, this is our sound that we've created over years, and this is our team, and we want that. We don't want to go to anyone else. This is the kind of record we want to make. And they were really, really supportive of it. And I mean, he even let me master the record. He was like, I'm all right, do you want me to send it to Ted Jensen? I'm like, yeah, that would be cool. I'm like, I already mastered it, but I'd kind of like to hear what Ted is going to do with it. And he was like, oh, I think it sounds great. I'm like, all right, well, then keep it. So I was pretty amazed because it was like my first major record like that. It is awesome when you have a really supportive A&R guy that you can actually talk to and have a good conversation where it's not like you feel like you're on the defensive as a producer and you have to justify everything you're doing because, you know, this track came out by this band on radio 4 days ago and the record that you're working on now sounds different. Now they think it's dated or, you know what I mean? It's just, I've had some ridiculous situations like that before.
Oh, absolutely.
So, Jamie, we've got some questions from the audience. I'll just get started with them. So, Austin Schaefer's asking, for a band like Between the Buried and Me, do you track them to a click, and do you have much creative input on their songs?
Yes, I do track them to a click. Usually, Between the Buried and Me and they're one of the more idealistic bands you could ever work with because they actually track the whole album before they come into the studio themselves. So Blake usually has all his tempos and stuff worked out in click tracks, and he just comes in and we just track to what he already has. So basically, he's re-recording the drums to get the best possible take. But yeah, as far as creative input, honestly, don't have a lot. You know, like there might be like a tempo adjustment that I might suggest, or harmonies. Usually, my input with the BT Bam is is just direct them with tones and that work for layering and harmonies or textures and things like that. They're really, since I guess the Colors record, they've been really into doing a lot of layers and things of that nature, and so that's usually where my input comes in. But as far as the bones of the song, as far as the drum parts, the bass parts, the guitar parts, I don't really have a lot of input. I used to help Tommy a lot with vocal harmonies, but he's really come into his own as a vocalist, and he's pretty much writing all his vocals and harmonies at this point.
I think one of the best things you can do as a producer is understand when it's better to just get out of the way.
So some bands I really try to help, give structure ideas and things like that. But, with what the Between the Buried and Me does, it's extreme, progressive type material. There's no rules, you know what I'm saying? There's no like, hey, you got to hit with the hook within the first 30 seconds and all that, like you do with like a commercial single. I honestly don't work with a lot of those type of clients. So unless what they're doing just sounds bad or not good, then I'm really big on like, let me hear what you're doing, as we go. A lot of times there's most of the clients I work with, they don't do any pre-production sessions or anything like that, like they did back in the. Most clients honestly don't even send demos, even though I request them. So a lot of times I'm hearing a song for the first time while they're tracking it. So I just let them record it and put it down how they have it, and then we'll go back and make modifications and tweaks at the end or whatever. If I feel like there's something that can be improved, and luckily as I've gotten on in the years and I've been doing this for a while, more people are more open to my ideas. And early on, I would just try to recommend stuff and they'd be like, no.
Yeah, it takes a while before I think someone's built up their name enough to where people just inherently trust them.
Yeah. I think for those beginners out there, it's like, so don't get discouraged if you're right about something.
Sometimes the band has to fail on their own and learn from that mistake. So
Yeah.
if you show people the result, sometimes they will resent you, but if you help them figure it out, they'll respect you for it. So you got to be careful with psychology, but sometimes they just have to fail. It is what it is.
There's a lot of psychology goes in this. It really is. I mean, as far as, getting along with the band or the artist and helping the band get along with each other and helping the band get along with the label. Going back to what we were saying with the labels, like I always encourage the band to keep the label happy, especially early in their relationship, because the label can do a lot for them if they decide to. Oftentimes, and the bands just usually are just, I hate the label. They're not giving us any royalties, which is true. But, it's just like, dude, you still want them on your side. You want them to make that phone call or, sign that check, for the tour support or whatever. So it's just like, at least entertain what they're saying. Anything that you can stomach of their ideas, try to entertain it, because that's ultimately a big cog in the business, as far as making a living playing music. And the more successful the band is, the better for us as, engineers, of course, that's what drives our business. And so I try to help the bands, material wise or whatever, try to make recommendations that might help them be more successful. As far as it's tone wise, it might make them more successful. As far as interactions with each other and the labels, that might make them more successful. I try to make recommendations where I think I have some insight.
Yeah, I think that's really, really important. So AJ Vienna is asking, when tracking drums, how do you handle the miking and recording process? And also with bands like BT Bam and Scale the Summit and Wretched, did you try to track them dry and then sample rooms, or do you throw up room mics?
I usually throw up room mics. I mean, I'm usually a lot of the projects I do out of my basement here, and it's a small room, and so there's not a lot of natural room ambience. So almost always supplement with some sort of convolution reverb to emulate a large space. But with the last Between the Barry and Me, we recorded a nice studio, and so we actually had a nice room to actually mic up and capture the sound. But I always record the room mic. So yeah, I'll mic each individual drum. The kick, I'll use a mic, 2 or 3 mics, and the snare, 2 or 3 mics, and each tom, and the cymbals usually either, depending on their cymbal setup, I usually try to at least capture stereo pair of cymbals, the hat and the ride, and stereo room and a mono far room usually.
Just to go a little deeper into what you said, what are some of your favorite snare mics and miking techniques? Like, because you said you use 3 or 4, and I also use 3 or 4, but I also know some guys that just like bottom and top. So I'm curious, what are some of your go-tos on snare?
Yeah, that's a kind of a recent thing. I mean, usually it's just top and bottom for sure, but every once in a while I'll add a side mic. I've seen that and actually laughed, when I saw that. I'm like, why is he miking the side? But I was like, I'm gonna just experiment with that, and it's particularly useful in terms of when you have to really hard gate the snare, or and I usually have a challenge of getting the cymbals out of the snare. If we're trying to use a real snare sound, and just to add a little bit of body back to the snare drum without a bunch of cymbals in it. It's a kind of a strangely useful thing.
I've actually done that same thing.
Yeah.
And I've also found that saturating the side mic sometimes can be really, really cool.
Yeah, compressing it hard and doing weird stuff that you can't really do with the top mic because of the hat bleed and things. I've got these little, I can't remember what they're called, but there's just covers to help reduce cymbal bleed. But if you put it on the side mic or whatever, it really, you get a pretty clean snare body sound or whatever. It's kind of an interesting thing. And every once in a while, I'll kind of put a condenser in the room, kind of more aimed just to capture the snare,
We were actually talking about that yesterday on the podcast. One thing I like to do is not a condenser, but hang an SM7B right over the snare, pointed right down, but like above the overheads. It's a really cool trick.
Yeah, I'd like to try that. Yeah, I've seen people do crazy things, and it's oftentimes just I start with the basics and see what we have. If I'm satisfied that it just depends on the snare drum, the player, and obviously, like I said, if you're going the more sample blend or sample replace route, then doing a bunch of that stuff is unnecessary. Like I want to see if the player's good first. If he's just playing raw, with dynamics and stuff like that, I'm just like, I'm going to have to do sample blend or replacement anyway. So it's like, I'm not going to put a bunch of mics and things of that nature.
I've definitely got my limits with that too, because I like to go crazy with miking and spend a long time on tuning and getting shit just perfect. But there's times where you do all that work and that it's tuned right, because I work with a great drum tech, because I don't trust the drummers to tune well, and I know when stuff is right, and then you get the drummer on there, and no matter what you do, it just doesn't sound that great. And so I've kind of learned to understand those situations, that I'm not going to settle for something bad, but I know that the majority of the sound is going to come from the samples, and so I won't take all the time in the world. I mean, I'm not going to have out-of-tune drums or anything dumb happening. So what about toms? You said you like to throw on more than one mic.
Well, generally toms I don't. Yeah, I don't do the whole top and bottom thing. Normally I'll just use one on top or whatever, the toms or whatever.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Lots of guys don't seem to like bottom toms mics.
I've done a few mixes where people have done them, and I haven't found them really, I guess, not necessarily that they're not useful, but they're just not necessary, for the tom sound that I usually go for, I guess, So I guess that's just it. I mean, I just haven't found a way that or need to use it, to me, like a snare is a really important part of the sound. A lot of times the toms are just kind of, I've had bands, I'd spend hours miking up their toms and they hardly use them on the whole record. It's like, yeah, I've had people come in with these monster kits and like double bass and not even touch the other kick. And it's just like, okay.
You know, I always make a point of addressing the structure of the kit before we get going, unless it's like a dude from a super old school band who's been playing the same enormous setup for 30 years, and there is no way that he's going to reduce it to 3 toms. No way. It's not happening no matter what you say, so don't even bring it up. But so something that Giovanni Angel is asking is, what was the toughest situation ever for you in a tracking session?
I think mainly just that, there's a few clients that I've ever, worked with before that are just assholes, honestly, just totally uncool people, and I hate that. I would rather work with a cool dude that's not a good player than work with an excellent player that's just a total asshole or whatever, that's just, it's tough for me. It's, I've developed an anxiety disorder because I'm a people pleaser. I want to try to make everybody happy, by nature. And I know that's difficult and in a lot of cases impossible, but with some people, it's just really impossible. It's just, they the people would try, like they come in, they're like, I'm not really feeling that. And blah, blah. I'm like, dude, we're not even, it's not mixed. It's not, you don't, it's like, you've told me yourself, you've never recorded before in a real studio. And then you're trying to tell me how to do my job. And
armchair mixers. Oh God, I hate them.
So I'm not going to point out any specific people or projects or whatever, but I've had that happen. And it's just, it's horrible. I mean, it really, it causes damage to my soul for some reason. I wish I didn't let it do that, but it just, it just really hurts when somebody is just an unbridled asshole for no reason.
Yeah, I concur on that one. So here's another thing that Giovanni Angel is asking is, in the bands that you've worked with, do you see more digital amps or tube amps? And especially these days, what are you seeing more of?
Oh, yeah, of course. These days are like, oh, sweet, you got an Axe-Fx. Let's use that. And, that's a big thing with the younger generation. But, I've also got a stack of heads. And the older generation, older guys come in, they always, they will not plug into the Axe-Fx. So it's
I hear that.
Yeah, it's split between the two camps, so, yeah, but I've definitely seen a lot, like, to me, like, you can get great sounds with the pod. You've got, Joey's Tone Forge now, and you've got, there's a lot of plugins that can sound fantastic, and obviously the Kemper units and Axe-Fx can sound great, if you tweak them, and but I also love the sound of real amps, like if you got a really amp with some good tubes in it and a great sounding cabinet and things like that, there's some magic that happens there. So, and it depends on the project. I think with the plugins and with the amp emulators and profilers and things, for some reason you get a little more definition easier, I guess, with those amps. It's tougher to get that kind of definition and articulation and percussive quality out of a real amp that you get with those things, and sometimes you need that percussive sound or whatever, that definition for the style of music that the band is. It's a really modern, articulate, alternate riff type stuff. You guys know what I'm talking about. I'm sure listeners probably do.
It's the air.
Yeah. It's just, but there's, like I said, you get, more of a rock band or whatever, and something just seems more large to me with the real amp deal. I don't know. Maybe it's just I'm old school or whatever, but
no, I think there's definitely a place for both. I think you can get great or terrible results out of
either. Yeah,
it takes a lot more skill to mic an amp though than it does to dial in a patch preset, in my opinion. So it's easier to mess up. There's like a bigger learning curve, I guess, is my point. With
there's more variables too.
Just moving the mic up, a fraction of an inch or whatever on the speaker cab, it means everything. It's just crazy stuff like that. But I mean, I think it takes a lot of skill to get a real amp or a plug-in to sound great too, because that's because you have to have the ear, and it's you have to know what frequencies are there that are weird and things of that nature. And I don't know. There's challenges to both realms, and there's a skill to be developed both ways. And I think, I try to just do both, whatever the clients feel comfortable with, whatever the production style kind of calls for, that kind of thing or whatever. So I don't think there's any right or wrong there,
I think the most important thing to just understand going in is that you have to approach them differently. Just like we were talking earlier about EQing in the box or out of the box, it's different. It'll do different things.
Absolutely.
Because it's just different. And, amps versus Sims, you can get great results out of both, but you shouldn't approach them the same way, because even though you're using an IR and a microphone emulation, it's not going to behave the way that a cabinet and a microphone behave. It's just not. It's a whole different thing. So just approach it differently. Approach it like you're learning a brand new skill set. So Greg Hink is asking, I'd love to hear about some of the vocal processing and clean guitar tones on the latest Contortionist album.
I'm trying to remember.
Talented band, because I've worked with them too.
Yeah.
Very talented.
Yeah, it's got a lot to do with them just being awesome, like as far as players and things like that. But strangely enough, I think we used the Mesa Boogie Mark V for all their tones. I think even the clean, we just kind of switched the channel and like, hey, sounds great. And they got some Ibanez's or whatever from Ibanez that had like coil taps or whatever. I think all the clean tones or most of them we used a split coil, just passive pickups, DiMarzio or whatever came in their Ibanez's, and we actually just ran them through an old school Boss ME50 multi-effects pedal.
Those are good.
Like I said, I used to have all the separate Boss pedals and all these pedals, and then a kid came in with one, and I sit down and A beat. I'm like, this sounds exactly like the pedals. Like, why do I have like a whole, shelf of pedals when I could just get this? So I just sold the pedals and got that. Most people who want pedals usually have some cool stuff when they come in the studio that they want to use, but they didn't, because I think they have Axe effects as they use live or something like that, or they did at the time, and they just wanted to kind of try to use a real amp, and they just, hey, that Mesa looks cool. And I think we plugged in the Mesa and the JVM, the Marshall, and I've got an old PV Ultra, and we just tried some different combinations, and they just ended up liking the Boogie. They just wanted kind of a more organic sound or whatever for the new record, more rock or something, less metally, and that the Boogie just kind of has that big fatter sound, I guess, that they were kind of wanting to go for on the record. So that's all we did for cleans, honestly, is just mess around with that pedal with some occasional chorus and reverb, and the Mark V into a Mesa cab standard with vintage 30s with a SM57 in the middle somewhere. And then vocals, we use my Neumann U87 into my Ventec or whatever, which is like a Neve clone.
I love an 87 into a Neve. That's a great combination. One of my absolute favorites.
Hey, that's the exact same chain I used on that guy as well.
Yeah, it just seemed to work with his. I tried a couple. I got an SM7 and I got a couple other mics that I try on people, and that would just seem like the good combination for Mike's voice or whatever. So we just went with that. As far as effects and stuff, we did, all kinds of stuff. It was just basic compression overall. Mike's just a fantastic vocalist, so tuning his vocals was minimal.
Yeah, I think that people need to understand something really, like, until you've worked with a great vocalist, you may not get it, but he sounds great without any of the fancy stuff.
Yeah.
You can get him sounding almost album ready straight in. That's when I got his voice coming through. It was like, okay, this is phenomenal. So from that point on, it was just, how do we want to dress this up? And I'm sure it was a similar thing for you. A lot of guys haven't had the opportunity to work with someone that good, so they're thinking more in terms of what do you do to get that magical sound, but it's him.
Yeah.
He's great.
And unfortunately, that's rare in this style of music in particular, to have somebody who can sing in pitch and who has a, great tone and great feel naturally, but yeah, so literally just put some different verbs on him here and there and some echo and, delay. And we had some cool, fun vocoder moments where we'd actually build like vocoder sounds with him actually singing the seconds and things of that nature. And, we messed with some little toy megaphones and just fun stuff like that, just little tone modifier type stuff or whatever. I think I have a couple vocal pedals, like a TC Electronics thing that does some vocoder robot sounds, and so we messed around with a lot of ideas like that. So
sounds about right to me. Something that Dmitry Jablonski is asking, please share some techniques you would use to track and mix bass to achieve the huge bass sound, but still make it really stand out in the mix.
I'm probably not the best guy to ask us. You guys would probably get bigger bass sounds than I do. But generally, what I do, I'm still a big fan of the actual bass amp sound or whatever. I just feel like it kind of blends in the mix a little more organically. Like you get with direct bass or whatever, you get the extended low end that just doesn't happen with a real amp in the mix. I don't know, it's kind of a preference thing there or whatever. But normally I'll just mic up the Ampeg or whatever the bass player uses. I usually mic a Beta 52 off axis on one of the speakers and then blend it with a Sennheiser 421 on axis, and usually blend those pretty evenly on the cab itself. And then in the mix, oftentimes if somebody wants, I oftentimes do like parallel processing where, this is a pretty common thing where somebody will, maybe cut almost like a crossover type situation where you'll cut the lows on one track and run some drive or distortion on one of the tracks, and then the other track you preserve more of a full frequency sound or just the lows only. You can compress and mix those differently, separately. Very similar technique, what other people do. And if you wanted that extended low end, like I said, you could always add in the direct signal. Like any guitars or bass I record, I always record direct signals, as most people do.
I don't understand why people don't sometimes. It's like, it's no like extra effort. Just, other than setting up another channel, like do it.
Yeah, it drives me insane when I get something to mix and there's no DIs, just for potential quantizing needs, just even if you just use it to see the rhythms to make sure everything's kind of, tight or whatever. Every once in a while you need something you need to tighten up, and if all you have is the distorted track or whatever, you can't do it. It's just like you're guessing, it's just, yeah, absolutely. Everybody just track direct guitars, please.
We will find you and hunt you down.
Yeah, there's a law.
I wish there was. The thing that bums me out is when you get something to mix and a guy is like, I want my, and I'm not talking about like Eddie Van Halen hitting us up or something. I'm talking about like some guy who's just real personal about some Engel amp he's had for 17 years or something, and the tone that they send you kind of sucks, and there's no DIs, and he just kind of worked you into a corner where even if the tone he sent you was good, it would still be helpful to have the DIs, because at least you could edit it or fix it or blend it with something. Who knows? Like,
absolutely,
a bunch of reasons to have a DI, even if you're going to use the tone that's given to you.
Yeah. Like I said, there's been countless times where I got a tone I think is sounding awesome, even in initial tracking, but you start layering up stuff and you realize it's just too thick or too much distortion or even not enough, it's too weak or whatever, and you have to go back and reamp it. And it's just a safety net thing for me, and it's useful for quantizing purposes if needed. And like you just said, there's no reason to not do it. Not that difficult. Just use a track.
Totally. Dude, that's all our questions from the crowd, and that's what we got, man. I want to really thank you for coming on. It's been great talking to you, and we love your work.
Yeah, Jamie, you've been awesome. Thank you.
Man, you guys are, like I said, you're the masters. So like I watch your classes and things on Creative Live myself, and I'm trying to steal all your sounds and techniques.
Well, and let me just say that people listening, you should also check out Jamie's Creative Live. You did it with Between the Buried and Me, and it was all about how you guys work together and the most recent record, right?
Yeah. It's just, it was actually Tommy from Between the Buried and Me in his solo record.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
But yeah, so it's just it's like we just went over some of the things we did for that record, and we covered some pretty interesting stuff in there. Might be some useful information.
Yeah, I thought it was a really cool Creative Live for sure. So,
well, you go check that out, audience, if you're listening.
Yeah, definitely go check that one out. So, all right, man. Well, thank you very much.
And thank you guys so much.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you guys so much, and I'll talk to you later.
The Unstoppable Recording Machine Podcast, brought to you by Mick DSP, professional audio plugins. For over 15 years, Mick DSP has continued producing industry-acclaimed and award-winning software titles. Visit mcdsp.com for more information. The podcast is also brought to you by Slate Digital. All the pro plugins, one low monthly price. Visit slatedigital.com for more information. Thank you for listening to the Unstoppable Recording Machine Podcast. To ask us questions, make suggestions, and interact, visit urm.academy/podcast and subscribe today.